wasn't.
Good evening all and welcome to Hill Center. My name is Eli Campbell. I'm the programming coordinator here and I'm really happy to see that you all made it through the frigid January cold. I want to thank you for being here. Can I ask real quickly if any of you are here for the first time this evening? No? Yeah, we've got a lot of good die-hard Bill Press fans and a couple new faces. That's excellent. Well, please check out your program, some other upcoming events. Bill's going to be sitting down with the mayor in a couple of weeks here, so that should be a good conversation as well. And I'd like to now welcome Bill Press and Congresswoman Jackie Speer.
Thanks. How many times have you put those on? Like 1,000 times. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for again braving the cold tonight. With a real treat to a conversation with Congresswoman Jackie Speer. And as Eli mentioned, the mayor will be here herself on February 1.
God willing.
We'll see, Jack. And we're looking forward to that. So I invite you to put that on your calendar as well. Congresswoman Jackie Speer is a great friend. We've known each other from California days for a long time, representing California's 14th congressional district, which is a little slice of San Francisco, the southern part of San Francisco, and then San Mateo County. She was on the Board of Supervisors in San Mateo County for a few years and then elected to the State Assembly and has been here in the United States Congress since 2008. Her claim to fame is in 2012. She was named by Newsweek as one of the 150 most fearless women in the world. Almost as good as being on Nixon's enemies list.
I was holding my breath when you said that was my claim to fame. I had heard something else.
Okay, so welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Hill Center. Your first visit to the Hill Center. It is January the 17th. Come January the 19th, is the government going to shut down?
No.
Really?
No.
How are we going
Don't
to
come
avoid?
stone me.
How are we going to avoid the shutdown?
I think what will happen is, this is my crystal ball, the Republicans will pass on a Republican vote a CR that has all of their takeaways of the Affordable Care Act, but funding of CHIP for kids for 6 years, and the CR for a month. It will
CR is continuing resolution.
Thank you. I will translate, I'm sorry. So the continuing resolution will pass the Senate. They will not take up any action on it. And they will pass to us a clean CR for a month, and we will pass it. That's my prognostication.
Let me follow that again. So the Children's Health Insurance Program will come out on the Senate side?
Everything will come out. I mean, they will just scratch it on the Senate side, introduce another clean CR, send it to the House, and we'll have to vote on that.
And that will keep the government running through February 16th.
Correct.
So it's like 2 or 3 weeks at a time, which is the best.
That's the best
that this group can do.
this group can do. That's right. 4 times now since the beginning of the fiscal year, they have kicked the can down the road.
4 times?
4 times. This is the 4th.
Okay. This is the 2nd or 3rd time that action will be taken without doing anything about the Dreamers. What happens then with the Dreamers program?
Well, that's why we feel very strongly that it should have been folded into this CR. And I think they thought they were going to do a fast one by putting funding in for the affordable, for CHIP, which is the children's health insurance plan program, and then cut the Affordable Care Act, which is what was also included. So there's $26 billion in tax cuts. They suspend the medical device tax for 2 years. They suspend the Cadillac tax and the health insurance tax. So, you know, it's killing the Affordable Care Act by 1,000 cuts is their approach to good government. And we're just not going to buy into that.
But so do you think any Democrats in the House will vote for the CR?
There may be a couple, I don't know. I think for the most part, you're going to see pretty unison vote.
Well, so
United vote, I should say.
so on the Dreamers, it keeps getting put off and put off and put off, and the deadline that the president gave Congress was March 5, otherwise the program expires.
So there's a.
So if you're a dreamer today, you must start, you're one of those 700,000 young people. You've got to be wondering whether anything's going to happen or not, or they're going to be subject to deportation.
So there is a bipartisan bill that was introduced today, I believe, by Mark Hurt and I believe it's Pete Aguilar. And together, that is a bill that has bipartisan support, 20 Democrats, 20 Republicans, and they do what's called Noah's Ark, 2 by 2. So you can't put all the Democrats on a bill because it scares the Republicans, so you just do it 2 by 2. And so that one has a great deal of merit. The Senate version is not as advantageous, some would argue. I would vote for either of them. I feel very strongly that we have an obligation to these 800,000 kids. Because you make a commitment and then you renege on it. We have a history in this country of doing that. We did that with the Rescission Act after World War II, where Filipinos who fought with us were told that they would be treated as veterans as all others who had fought in World War II from other countries, and yet the Rescission Act was signed and those benefits were taken away. So we have a tendency to do that, and I'm just not going to do it to these DACA kids. So if I will even vote for DACA if there is some funding for a pseudo wall. You know, I call it give the president a tech wall. Let him call it a wall, and make sure there's enhanced funding for sensors and drones or anything else to kind of create security on the...
Under the broad definition of border security,
Right.
you're saying, yeah. And you would vote for a bill that had that in it, as long as it continued the Dreamer program.
Now, the good news for Dreamers right now is that court case in California in the Ninth Circuit has opened up the opportunity for Dreamers to actually renew their status. How long that exists, of course, is up in the air.
So I'm not going to ask you whether the president said shithole or shithouse.
But he said,
Or as Lindsey Graham said, it's really turned into a shit show. But to what extent have his comments poisoned the well, if you will, in the immigration debate?
I think it has derailed negotiations for a number of days. I don't think it is fatal, however. And in some respects, you might argue that in the end, it might actually bring us to a resolution sooner than later, because he's got to kind of make it up. I mean, 44% of the American people now think he's a racist. That's a high number. So he needs to rehabilitate himself on some level. So I think if he stops listening to his whisperer in the White House, Stephen Miller, that there might be an opportunity. Give Lindsey Graham credit. I mean, I wax and wane on my appreciation for him, but more often than not. But he's stepped up in a very big way here. And the real danger here is how it has created a toxic environment in the Senate. Because having both Cotton and Perdue come out and just savage Dick Durbin for what political gain? astonishing to me. The decorum of the Senate is eroding quickly.
Yeah, the way that they decided to fall on their sword for Donald Trump. So, Congressman, you have been great on many, many issues, and one issue that really has been kind of your long suit, if you will, is you were Me Too before anybody else was Me Too, right? And you and I have talked about this many times on my show. You and Senator Gillibrand in the Senate, the two leaders really raising this issue on many different fronts. Do you sort of have the feeling that finally people are listening to me?
I gotta tell you, I'm almost giddy about it, because I introduced a measure in the House back in 2014 for just mandatory sexual harassment training for members and staff. And I sat on the House floor with an unnamed colleague who said it's not even going to come up to be considered as an amendment by the Rules Committee, let alone a vote on the floor. He just was, no way, no how, never. Now, the Me Too movement kind of took off, and you've got to take your openings when you can. So I went down and did a video in the recording studio about my Me Too experience when I was a staffer in the House many decades ago. And then the issue just gained so much momentum that Republicans were coming to me and saying, I want to work with you. So we introduced the Me Too Congressional Act, and then there were a couple of hearings, and now the chairman of the House Administration Committee, Greg Harper, and Bradley Byrd, who is a conservative, very conservative Republican from Alabama, and I have become, close friends on this issue, because he used to be an employment law lawyer and knows this backwards and forwards and gets it. And so the bill will be introduced tonight, or tomorrow. It'll have a hearing probably next week. It'll probably be voted on first week in February.
So this is for the process, right? Of how people can report and what happens.
So we already have passed the sexual harassment prevention training, so that's done.
Right.
And that's going out to bid right now.
So there will be training, just so you understand, for every new member, for every member?
For every member, for every staff member, for every intern and every fellow, mandatory every year, or every 2 years.
Every term.
Every term, probably. But the problem was, when I delved into it, the Office of Compliance was a hole.
Yes.
Because it really was the place to which the harasser was protected and the victim was not. Because you had a 1 month period where you would counsel about your legal responsibilities and rights. There was mandatory mediation for another month. There then was a 1 month cooling off period. There was a confidential agreement. I mean, and meanwhile, the taxpayers were paying for the attorney for the harasser, or the office of the harasser, and the victim was sitting there by herself. I had one woman who came to me. I can see her sitting on my couch crying, saying the process was worse than the harassment. So we had to change that. So the good news is that we will have counsel for the victims now, paid for by the House of Representatives. There is not mandatory mediation. There is no mandatory non-disclosure agreements. There will be a general counsel that will do an investigation once a complaint is filed. If there is either reasonable cause or a decision that you couldn't decide one way or the other, that moves on to a hearing officer, then appeal to the board, and you still then can go to the district appellate court if you want.
How widespread is...
Oh, but the most important part, excuse me, is that if the harasser is the member, the settlement will be paid out of this fund in the Treasury, but the member will, within 90 days, have to pay back the Treasury for the settlement, or come up with a plan, and a plan would require garnishment of wages, and if that's not sufficient to pay it off, then they will go to the thrift plan that we have. And thirdly, it will go to Social Security. So I laughingly said to someone on the Hill today, I said, you know, we're not going to have sexual harassment on the Hill anymore. Going to scare the living daylights out of these.
How widespread is the problem of sexual harassment or sexual assault in the Congress? And I guess a follow-up question, are there any more cases that are going to come forward? I mean, but now we have what, Blake Farenthold? You know, it's got to be more than that.
There are more. There's one member that has a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement that is a seated member. It has not become public. People say, well, why aren't you outing him? And I say, because I'm here to protect the victim. And the victim is unwilling to come forward, does not want it. She doesn't want to see her name all over the newspaper. So I'm not sure how or if that one will ever come out. But 3/4 of those who are sexually harassed never reported.
3/4 of those who are sexually harassed.
So, you know.
Is that going to change now, do you believe?
Well, I think more and more will come forward. There's going to be an expectation that you can work in an environment that is not subject to sexual harassment or hostile work environment. So I do think that will just, I think it's been going on in the Hill. So I had one staffer, it's amazing how, also I'm best friends with all the members on the Hill, all the staff members on the Hill. I walk by them, these huge grins come on their faces. It's almost like I know what they're thinking or what they're saying. But one woman came up to me and said, you know, I was staffing, there's computers in the back of the House floor. One night when we had late votes. And the member came up to me, rubbed himself up against me, and stuck his tongue in my ear. On the House floor. And I thought, you know, so unfortunately an environment like that where everyone starts to laugh at your bad jokes and you've got staff that basically are, you know, there to make sure everything goes well for you. Some people don't know where the boundaries are.
Yeah. What I was going to ask you that, but then what are the rules, do you think, or what should the rules be, or what are the boundaries, or what should they be?
Well, you know, sexual harassment is an unwanted sexual advance that is either pervasive or severe. Or it's a toxic, hostile work environment. So, you know, does one incident rise to sexual harassment? Depends if it's severe. If it's just, hey, you know, you're looking really good, I mean, that's not sexual harassment. If it's, I really want to go to bed with you, is that severe? Could be. You know, it's always an evaluation of the facts. If it happens a second time, I think you're then moving into the pervasive.
Right. So each case has to be considered, right, and there's scales. Given that, was it a mistake to come down so hard on Al Franken?
I think, I mean, I can't speak for the Senate, but he did submit to the Ethics Committee review. There was one case, then there was another case, and before you knew it, there were 8 cases. And the women of the Senate came forward and said, you've got to go, you should resign. And so he accepted that. Now, he had a choice. He probably could have weathered it. Maybe. I mean, I don't know how many more cases there are or were. He's a great legislator, and it's really, you know, unfortunate. But, you know, we're creating a different culture, and we're not going to tolerate it anymore. Now, Blake Farenthold should be out of there. Should absolutely be out of there. And I've said so to the Speaker. and he is now before ethics. And there's a second case in his situation, slightly different, because it was a young man who was being impacted by a hostile work environment, who was throwing up after work every day. I mean, it was really a regrettable situation. But the good news is, it's going to be very different.
So where do we go from here with this now? I mean, I saw today a picture on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. There's a huge billboard. Time's up, right? I mean, we hear it, we see it. Do you think things will be different now? And like in the corporate world, in the Congress, in Hollywood?
I think, I really think it, I think this is not just
And beyond.
A defining moment. I think it's a defining milestone. I really believe we are seeing a cultural change in this country that our sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters are not going to have to put up with, which should be refreshing to all of us. The Time's Up movement has committed to giving the money it generates to the National Women's Law Center here in Washington, D.C., so that the lawyers there can take on these cases, whether it's a farm worker in the fields, or a dishwasher in a restaurant, or someone with an NDA that wants to challenge it. So there's $2 million that's been generated so far, and the National Women's Law Center is going to be treasurer of it.
I don't know if you've had a chance to catch up with a case that's been talked a lot about now, Aziz Ansari, the young actor. Even in terms of where this fits on the scale, Ashley Banfield on headline news for CNN said, just accused, she called it a reckless accusation against him, that this was a first date night gone bad. Do you have any feeling about, I don't know whether everyone knows what happened, but she's not shaking heads. I think people realize this woman did say that she went back to his apartment, he pressured her to have sex, she really didn't want to, she was pretty clear, she didn't want to, he kept pushing, and finally, it's some kind of sex, but not all the way, if you will. And then he called,
Your age is showing.
I'm very uncomfortable talking about that. But he called Uber and she went home, but anyhow, so she now has.
So the fact patterns in these cases are going to be different. And, I think that he was remorseful. It appears that there was either a text or two texts that exchanged at the time, and he was very apologetic. I don't know if there's more to that story. I'm not going to offer an opinion necessarily, but part of what we are saying now is we believe the women, in part because there is this culture right now where you discredit the woman more often than not.
Right.
And I know in all the work I've done on sexual assault, that 92% of those who come forward are telling the truth. I mean, you don't do this for the most part because it's such a painful experience, and having to retell the experience, and having to go through the legal process, and having to relive it. It's just not worth it. But what oftentimes brings women to come forward is because they see a sexual predator in their midst, and they don't want it to happen to someone else.
Mm-hmm. And they see other women coming forward too. So
right, that's oftentimes how it
So all of that progress, what progress have you made in terms of where I think you started, as we first started talking about, with the military and the chain of command?
So that's been, a 7-year process that I've been engaged in. We're not there yet.
They still resist.
They still resist. They want, the issue is whether or not these cases of sexual assault should be taken out of the chain of command. Kept within the military with a separate office that does the investigation and decides whether or not to take up the case. So the chain of command is not making that decision. The reason why is because oftentimes the chain of command either is part of the problem, the harasser or the assaulter is in the chain of command, or it's a best friend of the chain of command, or the chain of command, because the military is all about moving up. And if it appears that you've got a problem with sexual assault under your command, it may impact your ability to be promoted. So a lot of disincentives to take on these cases. So that's why I think it's very important to pull them out. What's happened to so many of these victims is that they become pariahs. There's a way to kind of root them out. They oftentimes have been identified as having a personality disorder and given an honorable or general discharge. So there's been punitive action taken against
the victims.
And many of their lives are just destroyed by it. And oftentimes in the medical system within the military, the way they deal with it is just to drug them up. And then they get addicted. So you can see this downward spiral that occurs. So I still think that we've got lots of work to do there. And I'm hoping that with this renewed awareness around sexual harassment, that we can build on it within the military. What is astonishing to me, I visited one of the academies, I'm going to be visiting all of them this year. They do a climate survey, as we do in the military, and we will be doing on Capitol Hill now. That's part of the Me Too legislation. But the climate survey found that in all of our academies, and this is what's so astonishing, 49% of the cadets have been sexually harassed in the academies. Now, let me tell you, these are the best and brightest, right? That it is a rigorous process to get appointed. You've got to have high grades, high SAT scores, great athletic ability. I mean, you've got to be the cream of the crop. And if half of them are engaging in women, sexual harassment, what does that tell you about the next generation of leaders in the military? So we've got to come to grips with that.
You know how it works. Our half-an-hour conversation almost up, and then it's up to you. So get your questions ready, and we'll come into in just a couple of minutes. But among other of your duties in the Congress, Congresswoman, you are a member of the House Intelligence Committee, which has had an interesting couple of days. Starting,
see the bags under my eyes.
Yeah, you were there late last night. Poor Steve Bannon, you kept him so long. What can you tell us about what Steve Bannon told you?
Well, there's an interesting dynamic going on the House side of the committee, and what's been going on since this investigation began last year. He was forthcoming on questions that were asked about his time during the campaign, which is about 85 days. He then said that through his attorney who was there, that the attorney had been in consultation with the White House counsel, and that he was not able to speak about anything during the transition or while he was staffing as chief strategist or senior strategist to the president during his time in the White House, and couldn't talk about any conversations he's had since then. So there's this...
Can the White House do that?
There's this quasi-effort to invoke executive privilege. Now, executive privilege cannot be invoked unless it's for national security or keeping it private is in the best interest of the public. Now, I don't think the president's going to be able to make that. So I think they've been trying to impose it without imposing it, or invoking it without invoking it, because it clearly needs to be challenged in court. When it's been invoked before, for the most part, it's been overturned in the courts. With both Clinton and Obama, that happened. So, you know the first person who invoked...
Richard Nixon. No.
Eisenhower?
No.
The George Washington.
George Washington. It wasn't called, executive privilege at the time, but it was a war setting, and Congress wanted to find out how.
So is the plan to bring Steve Bannon back?
Yes, he will be back.
Under subpoena, then to.
Well, he was subpoenaed yesterday, but then, so he spoke about the pre-White House time, but the White House now wants to know the parameters of our questioning, and on that basis, you're not going to muzzle the Congress of the United States. We're two equal branches along with the judiciary, making it three, so I think it's.
And your guest today was another
Guest
today, right? Your victim today.
We had two we had two interviewees today. I think that's all public, right? Have you all heard about it? Because I can't tell you if you haven't already heard about it. But yes, we had two today.
It is public. One of them certainly is.
Which one is it?
Corey Lewandowski.
Okay, Corey Lewandowski is there right now, actually.
Oh. And did the White House attempt to, can I ask, I'll ask, but you can answer now. Did the White House attempt to gag him as well?
I would tell you that he has said that he will speak to us and answer all of our questions. And because he wasn't prepared to answer questions from a particular time frame, he has agreed to come back after he's had an opportunity to prepare.
So what does this tell? There's been a lot of cynicism about the House Intelligence Committee and its investigation. That people think, that the Mueller thing is serious, he's really doing his job. The Senate, even not as much, but a very serious bipartisan operation, where the House Committee has been torn, certainly. Is it now getting its stuff together? Is it, you believe it's going to carry through with a serious investigation and come to some conclusion, or is it continue infighting? How do you feel
My
about
opinion is that it got off on the wrong foot with the midnight ride of Chairman.
Justin or no one, it wasn't.
Devin Nunes.
Devin Nunes, yeah, from California, right.
And it has, it's been rocky
Mm-hmm.
for the duration of it. I would say that there are, I think the White House attempts to weigh in more often than not, ever so subtly, whether it's through Fox News or in a tweet, and I think it has an effect. I think that our interests are different. The Republicans are focused on unmasking, and the Democrats are more focused on the interference by Russia and the potential relationship or coordination that took place between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives. But let me tell you what the biggest concern should be for all of us. It should be the integrity of our election system, because the Russians hacked into over 20 states' voting records, and the intelligence agencies opined through their the intelligence assessment that was offered up in January of last year, that there was no, they had no, I forget how they actually put it, but they had confidence that the election machines had not been hacked into. Now, can I just give you a minute on that?
Please.
There are about 4 companies in the country that make these machines. States, counties, jurisdictions, all have individual contracts with these 4 companies. These 4 companies, in their contracts, do not allow the licensee to what we would call, red team the machines to see if there's any bugs. The software has not been tested, therefore. It's also old. And, we see sophisticated companies with, data breaches all the time. So imagine these 4 software companies that haven't really done anything and haven't allowed for the software to be tested. And so there you have it. So DEF CON was a convention in Las Vegas last spring. They were able to buy on eBay. You can buy anything on eBay now. They bought 10 voting machines on eBay. They had them there. They had all these hackers there. Before the opening ceremony was complete, one of the machines had been hacked. And by the end of the weekend, all 10 of them had been hacked. Now, that should send up,
Many red flags, right?
many red flags. And unfortunately, it hasn't. I brought one of those hackers to the Capitol and had a briefing. And it was really compelling. So I now want to bring some machines in and have members vote and then show them what the machines actually spit out, which will be very different than the votes they cast, and that might get their attention.
Yeah. So you've no doubt that the Russians tried to hack and interfered in our election.
Oh, there's no question that they did. Now, there's still, the president, others within the administration say, well, I'm not absolutely sure. They still talk about this 400-pound, guy sitting on a couch hacking, but, it really was President Putin and his gang of oligarchs and the Internet Research Agency. If you haven't heard about that, that's an agency in St. Petersburg that sends in 300 of their young techies who spend all day creating Facebook pages and bots and the like that have infiltrated not just the United States but so many other countries.
Congresswoman Jackie Speer, great to have you here tonight. And I see that Tracy has a microphone and Neela has a microphone here, so please just raise your hand and dive in on any topic covered or not covered, please. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Lucy Getman with an organization that serves women state legislators called Women in Government. Thank you so much for your state service. In your reflections on addressing the sexual harassment issue, which of course is roiling across state capitals as well, upon reflection, do you think there are any differences between remedies from the state and federal level, or there are other remedies in an ideal world that we could address, maybe to address lobbyists or folks who don't actually work for legislators but still are impacted by the culture, and just any thoughts you have about what you would do next if you could?
So I did have a group of lobbyists here on the Hill come in one afternoon, and I asked them about their experiences. And interestingly, that's where there's probably a difference with state legislatures and the Congress, because for the most part, the lobbyists don't meet with the members. They tend to meet with the subject matter expert or the chief of staff. Now, you could arguably have that kind of issue with the chief of staff, but in the House, in the state legislatures, you typically have much more one-on-one relationships and meetings that take place. Certainly in my experience in California generally, even now, there's lots of examples of how that was happening. So they were interested in having the ability to contact the hotline. We are creating a hotline as well. And they also were interested in having the training, which I think we may make available to them at a fee, so they can know what the parameters are of sexual harassment as well.
By the way, I've thought of this during this whole process. I worked in the legislature as chief of staff to a state senator.
And what year was that?
In Sacramento. Yeah, that was 100 years ago. But I have to tell you, the atmosphere in Sacramento was really toxic in terms of the way men treated women in Sacramento. And when you were there, probably the same. It was rampant.
Oh, when I was in the state legislature.
Worse than I've heard about here, but, or as bad.
Oh, I almost think it's worse now, though. Because when I was there, I actually had mandatory sexual harassment training for the members every year imposed to the Rules Committee. But one year, and the way I got it, Speaker Willie Brown was Speaker at the time, and there was an end of session bash every year, and they always had a poster, Willie's World was one, and this particular year, it was a woman's leg in a stiletto heel. And it was just a great example of how you can objectify a woman, right? So I took the poster with the signatures of staff and lobbyists and some members to his office and said, "This has got to stop it." He was like, "No." So that's how we actually got the training back then. But look how much good it did, right? And now it's, you've still got a huge problem.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Here we go.
Do you see a change in the House with the midterm elections taking place and the Democrats taking control? And is there any softness in the GOP in any of these issues like the Dreamers, considering that elections are coming up? I mean, do you see any resistance to the party line?
So there's a twofold question.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So your first question, will the House, will the Democrats retake the House? I think we have a shot at it. I'm not quite as optimistic as some, because I hate being disappointed, I guess. But, because you got to remember that these districts have, for the most part, have been designed to maximize Republican membership. And that won't change until the next census, which is another issue we should probably spend a minute talking about. But so I'm cautiously optimistic, but we've got to pick up 24 seats. There are a number of members now who are retiring on the Republican side that we have the shot of picking up now that they're retiring.
Especially in California.
In
Two of them
California.
last week. Right.
And McSally in Arizona could be a great pickup that wouldn't even be considered if she hadn't decided to run for the Senate. So there's reason to be optimistic. What's fascinating about it is that we have 369 women running in congressional seats around the country. We have never, ever seen that kind of participation. It's
I'm calling that the Trump bump.
I'm calling it the year of Wonder Woman. The Amazons are taking over. But the other thing is that women are becoming donors now in huge numbers. So 4 times as many donors that are women than 2 years ago.
The last time I talked, just on that point, to Stephanie Shriak, who's our good friend, is the president of Emily's List. When Hillary was the nominee, they had a record number of women who signed up for their training to run for school board, city council, state legislature, whatever. 900 of them. That was a record. This year, they're training 15,000.
Wow.
15,000 women for all those different levels. So it's just huge energy there, particularly among women who are saying, you know what? Started with the March on Washington.
Yeah, no, it absolutely did. But to your second question, I would say that there is some softening. You'll see more softening if they start to see their poll numbers change. I mean, the big fear before was that the president and Bannon would run more conservative candidates against them. Now that Mr. Bannon is not in a position to do that, and there doesn't appear to be an heir apparent, and the fact that Republican members now are starting to move away from the president in terms of wanting him in their districts, like there could be some softening there.
Good. Well, he was so helpful to Roy Moore. Eli, right there, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Most of us here remember Strom Thurmond as in the Senate. He had a bad reputation, but I assumed that he was the only one at the time. I'm sure there were lots of others who were sexually harassing women. Women knew not to get into the elevator with him because they'd get pinched. and worse. But he was never, he retired gracefully, I guess. I don't remember anybody bringing suit against him. What can you tell us?
About him? I don't really know anything about him. It was before my time, but you know, I think to Bill's point, I mean, it has been it's been open season on women in the state legislature and here on Capitol for a long time. There's something that happens to people when they get a little bit of power. I don't, somehow the air kind of goes into their lungs and through their veins and their brains, and you know, they lose all sense of gravity.
So,
But there's a small, first of all, let me say, it is a small group of people. I really believe it is not the norm.
so Strom Thurmond, South Carolina, correct? I mean, I just want to be sure I got the right one.
Didn't he have a
He had,
baby or something?
yes, he had an illegitimate child by a woman, an African American, who worked in his home, the racist Strom Thurmond. But I visited the Capitol, South Carolina, a couple of years ago, and on the Capitol grounds there is a statue in back of the Capitol of Strom Thurmond. And
Did they move it?
Pardon?
Did they move it?
No, well, no, it's I don't know, maybe that's the only place they had room for it, but on the side of the statue, it was Strom Thurmond, let's just say they're kind of whatever, you know, married and with 4 children, and they had taken off the floor and put in 5. They changed that, and you could see that it was a change that had been made when all this came out. We have, yes,
Thank you. Is this on?
Just tilt
No.
it.
talk right
Okay.
in.
Yeah?
Got it.
So I sort of hate to take up all of your time talking about sexual harassment, which is an important issue, but, you know, you've obviously done so much more than that. But I just personally, very quickly, you know, have experienced it myself, but I'm a lobbyist, but what I'm most concerned about is that we come out of this whole kind of cleansing process, and that women are not, as a result, hired less in offices, and we have fewer females in you know, office and in leadership positions, and that we do, you know, because I already hear murmurings of male members who are concerned about, you know, having women around, and there's certainly members who we all know who are very uncomfortable around women before all of this, you know, uproar. And my fear is that even if it's in subtle ways, that we're sort of locked out of, you know, the good old boy backroom conversations about when deals get made, and that obviously we have a lot to add to the conversations, and how do we make sure that as a result of this, we really progress and we don't kind of go back to times when men make all the decisions.
So it's a good question. It's been asked a number of ways, a number of times, and here's how I answer it. First of all, as part of this training that we're going to be requiring all members and staff to participate in, and it's not going to be an online, it's going to be in-person, interactive, tailored for the Congress. One of the points that we are going to make sure is made is that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prevents you from making a decision to discriminate against gender, based on gender. So you could have an action brought against you on that basis, which would be subject to the process as well. Secondly, I think that there just isn't room for that in society, and we just can't tolerate it. If I walked into an office and it was all men, I'd start asking a lot of questions.
Thank you for your work.
All right, please.
Hi. Could you talk a little bit about what is going on with the census? And I know that there are a lot of dedicated civil service members in the Census Bureau who are distraught about not being able to do their job. But also, how are the Democrats dealing with this throughout government? I mean, there are a lot of agencies where civil service principles are being ignored or just violated, and you know, places like Interior and EPA and Labor, where people are being intimidated and not being allowed to really do their job.
That's a very important question on two issues, actually. Let me first address the census. One of the recommendations is being made that is going to be added to the census unless we are successful in pushing back, is a question on whether or not you're a citizen. So imagine, first of all, people aren't going to want to respond. It's going to suppress the numbers. So it'll suppress the districts. It's also going to suppress formulas for funding. And it could become very, very insidious. So we cannot let that happen. Because districts are not determined based on who's a citizen, but the population of a district. And so, this is a very conscious effort to try and...
I mean, so many programs, right? Like,
and financing-wise, it could be...
food stamps or across the board.
And for the first time in California, I mean, we are the largest delegation, but we are potentially at a point where we could lose a seat because there's been a level of out-migration that's gone on. So if we're not going to count the undocumented residents in California, that would be a huge hit to the state. And then your second question about, I just give credit to the civil servants in the federal government who continue to serve under what are really dire circumstances right now. And I guess my message to them is just hold out for another 11 months. And if the midterms are as I hope they will be, we can put a stop to much of this. But it is amazing to me, as long as I've been in politics, 34 years, I came into the beginning of last year with President Trump saying, well, he can't do that much damage. And I have been so shocked by the decimation that has gone on across the country and in terms of services that we have provided forever. I mean, issues that were never, ever partisan, like CHIP and funding children's health care, that have become just political footballs.
Right here? Yeah.
I hardly need a mic, but this may be a bit broad, but I would really appreciate your insight into the internal divisions within the Democratic Party right now, and in particular the debate about to what extent there should be compromise and cooperation. For example, in the recent DACA debate, Elizabeth Warren saying clean DACA or nothing. Whether or not the party is unified or if there is an internal division that is crippling the effectiveness of the Democratic Party in deciding to what extent to compromise or just to hold to progressive values.
So, there are those within the party in, positions of great strength and potential presidential candidates that, are taking positions, I think, because they want to somehow distinguish themselves from others. I can't speak for the entire Democratic Party. I do think that the leadership realizes that we have to be willing to compromise to a certain extent without compromising our principles. I mean, that is part of the legislative process. And I told you earlier, give me DACA and I'll throw some money your way for your foamy wall. And if we could retake the House, then you could stop the shenanigans going on. But we can't lose sight of what's most important. We've got to keep our eye on the ball.
Is coming in strong here? Okay. Yes. Hi.
Hi, I'm in the back, so I'm going to stand up. My question is, you talked a lot about sexual harassment in the House and other industries. I'm the equivalent of a lobbyist. We can't call ourselves that. I work in the nonprofit sector. And I think we're not as surprised as a lot of Americans are by the racism that we see in this president. But our field is also still very affected by the Me Too kind of complex. I remember sharing with a colleague of mine who works at a foundation who funds me something that happened to me with another nonprofit person, and she said, I promise I won't tell anybody. And I remember feeling comforted by that, that she wouldn't tell anybody. And then as Me Too happened, another colleague said to me, I heard this happen to you, it happened to me also. But we also don't have, kind of in our structure, the way Congress does or Hollywood does. I know you mentioned farm workers, wage workers. And the nonprofit sector is pretty big, actually, pretty well funded. But we also don't have a mechanism to kind of address this because it's so tied to funding and your survivability in that field. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
I will say that, you know, when your funding or your potential opportunities to succeed are tied to something, it becomes more difficult. I had introduced a bill in the last Congress, which I will be reintroducing, about academia. Huge problem in academia in postgraduate, where you have your advisor and your whole future is dependent on whether you get a good recommendation. And so the bill I have would restrict funding to individuals who have been found to have sexually harassed or sexually assaulted. So I mean, I think we've got to look at where your funding comes from, and if there's government funding there, then there's a way. Then the foundations, they're going to have to look at that issue as well, I think, moving forward.
Right next door to you, but in the front row. Yeah.
Thank you for all your great work and your candor and your ease of answering all these questions. You addressed the issue of election integrity, and I gather that's primarily dealt with in the states, but it sort of left me on edge in terms of the 2018 elections, and you know, what is actually happening in the states. I heard something not long ago about some expert talking about it, saying, well, we don't have paper ballots as backups. That was one of the problems. So what, you know, how do we have some confidence going forward?
So I think there's a number of ways that we can fix it. We can't tinker with the states, but we can have a huge effect if we basically pass a law that says for all federal elections, which frankly happen every 2 years, every state would have to provide paper ballots and audits. You can change that overnight. And in talking to the experts, that's what they're telling me we need right now. You need paper ballot, scanned, and you audit.
Are Republicans interested in that?
Well, they'll be interested in it if it all of a sudden starts affecting their races.
You've had a long day at the Hill, and it's very kind of you to give us so much for your time tonight, Congresswoman. Before we leave, back to the question of maybe the likelihood that Democrats at least have a good shot at taking back the House, no guarantees. If Democrats do, what is the appetite for impeachment?
Good question. I have no answer. I think there.
What do you hear from your
I mean, I think there would be
Democrats?
an impeachment effort. You know, impeachment, you can impeach. It's very hard once you shift to the Senate and they're tried.
Actually convict, right?
You know, I've been a big proponent of the 25th Amendment and exercising it and utilizing it because I've talked to many experts who are psychiatrists, and if you've read the book or heard the book of The Dangerous Mind of Donald Trump, the editor of that spoke last week at a small gathering, and Dr. Lee kind of framed it quite well. It's not about the mental health of the president, it's about the mental health of the American people. And the truth is that I can't do a town hall in my district that I'm not inundated by what I call me as a political psychiatrist. I spend all of my time tamping down anxiety and concern about our Are we going to war? Is our country coming to an end? Is our democracy over? Those kinds of issues. So I think the 25th Amendment has great merit. I've spoken to neurologists, and it's interesting, the president who's just got this clean
right.
health. But one neurologist who talked to me said that he appears to be suffering from a neurological degenerative disease. And he says, and there's a wealth of data out there because he's done so many interviews over so many years. And if you look, he says, if you look at his comments in an interview right after 9/11, he spoke in complete sentences, 4 or 5 syllable words, and there was a level of compassion. He says if you kind of watch his language and read his language, today it's called impoverished language, or impoverished speech. And it's, it doesn't speak in complete sentences, he meanders, there's smaller syllables, and so he says that we should be looking more at that than his mental capacity. But in any case, the 25th Amendment provides, if the Vice President, majority of the Cabinet believe he is incapacitated, all they have to do is write a letter to the House and the Senate, and the Vice President becomes the acting President, and it takes a vote by the House and Senate, and a 2/3 vote if the President objected. And it would take a 2/3 vote to retain the Vice President. But I think we have to place the burden on those who are with him day in and day out to evaluate whether or not his mental stability and or his neurological status is questioned.
Do you believe there's enough evidence today to trigger the 25th Amendment?
I do. Without a doubt, I do.
I might add that Michael Tansley, who is one of the psychiatrists in this book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, is on my show tomorrow morning at 7:30. So you can stream it at billpressshow.com. It's a very powerful book. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list now for several weeks. It's 27 of the leading psychiatrists in the country who make the case that he is a danger to the Republic.
I think if you think about it in terms of incapacity, I mean, when 44% of the American people think you're a racist, but when you look at all of these indices that would suggest that this is not someone who's unifying our country, that indicates an incapacity to lead.
Right. She is not only there present for the good people of California, but for all of us, and we are very grateful for your leadership, your Congresswoman. Don't forget, February 1, Mayor Bowser. We'll see you then.